Hi. Um, this talk scares the crap out of me, so apologies in advance. So I'm David. I am the Director of Architecture at a company called New Day in London. I've written a few kids' books, bizarrely, about programming. I've built some big web things, whatever. It doesn't really matter in the end, because most importantly, I love making stuff. That's the important bit. And I finally, this year, am feeling kind of old. And this is a little bit of like a existential dread and chill talk. So I want to talk about growing up and getting older in software, and some of the things I've learned on the way doing that, and especially the things that really did not go as I planned. So before we talk about software, I really want to talk about advice a little bit. So here's a deep cut for anyone that's also feeling kind of old. In June of 1997, a columnist for the Chicago Tribune called Mary Schmidt wrote an article, and it was called, somewhat prophetically, "Advice, like youth, is probably just wasted on the young." And you hear that all the time, right? And despite its kind of cynical title, the author was attempting to write a hypothetical university commencement speech, because she said that most people never get the chance to do that, to really give out their life's worth of advice. And so she wrote it and just published it to see how it went. Now, what the piece did is it outlined various ways that you could live a happier and more fulfilling life, and it was noteworthy for being one of the early examples of a viral email. It was one of the first memes, I suppose proto-meme, because meme didn't exist as a term at the time. So it kind of came out at the same time as classics like All Your Base Have Belong to Us. So we're real vintage here. And you can see the words to the essay on the slides behind me here. And, it spread so widely and it was so popular among the early internet that, remember Usenet and netizens? It was spread on Usenet by netizens. Brilliant. That it was misattributed to the Slaughterhouse-5 author, Kurt Vonnegut. I can never pronounce his surname. Begins with a V, has a load of G's in it. And it was said that he gave this commencement speech because it was so poignant and people thought it sounded like his writing. Now, here's the thing. Despite the cynicism of the title, it was mostly a pretty uplifting essay of simple, universal truths that people really kind of connected to. And for his part, good old Kurt, he said he wished he had written it, but he didn't, which I thought was quite nice. So, as we think about advice and viral emails, I want to graciously nod to one of Australia's most famous exports, Baz Luhrmann. Sorry, Hugh Jackman, not you this time. I'm sure he's heartbroken at not making it into my talk, though. So, in 1998, Baz Luhrmann was putting together this album called Something for Everybody, and he received this very same spam email, meme, complete with the misattribution, right? So he contacted Kurt, and he was really worried because he wanted to use it and didn't think he'd get the rights, because he was recording an album and he wanted to use it as lyrics to a song. Now, actually, he then discovered the whole story about it being an author from the New York Times, and he got in contact and he actually got the rights that very same day. And he started recording. Now, I was 13 when this song came out, and I first received that chain letter maybe 6 months earlier from a Usenet group pushed to my CompuServe email address, and I can feel people with back pain groaning at the idea of CompuServe email addresses. So CompuServe for the kids in the room is like AOL for boomers, and AOL, I guess, it's just Wi-Fi for Gen X, something like that. And basically, I promptly forgot about the email until the following summer, when it was literally everywhere. It went to #1 in the charts in the UK. And it was #1 for the whole summer, and it's with some irony that the title of the original essay, like that, most of the advice was, in fact, wasted on the young, me. And I didn't really understand why the song was so big. I didn't get it. It was really boring, just like this 7-minute long spoken word thing over a beat. I was probably too busy listening to Nine Inch Nails, something other era appropriate. So what I was doing, though, is I was learning programming at the same time this came out. For the first time, I was totally lost in the wonder of all of this stuff, right? And almost 30 years into this kind of journey, into this vocation, I think I finally understand the song. I really think I got it now. So I spent a lot of time talking to people from across the industry over the last couple of years about kind of how well we are all doing, how we are, and how I still find the joy in everything after all this time. And I want to talk to you now about survival and optimism a little bit. So, goddamn, last couple of years sucked. Really, really pretty horrible for basically everybody, I'm sorry. And, it's made it really difficult to write about where we're at as an industry because, the truth is a lot of people don't really know what's going on or why it's happening to us. I don't think there has ever been such an uncertain time to be working in technology, probably in my entire lifetime. And you've been hearing for years that we've had skills shortages, that you needed to get into coding. In the UK, we've had to endure half a decade of politicians telling everybody that, in air quotes, their useless arts and humanities degrees are rubbish and they should just all learn to code. And we've rolled out loads of boot camps around the world, the Silicon Valley grind set hustle culture, the mobile boom, the gaming boom, Apple and Microsoft competing to be the world's most valuable companies for an entire decade. But a common sentiment, if you kind of ask your peers on the floor, is that we're in a time of unprecedented technical recession. Except, well, I don't know, it's not really that unprecedented. That's the funny thing, right? So I first started getting into paid programming in the late 90s as an older teenager. And it was kind of around the time of the dot-com boom and crash. Shit. So my first adult memories, of kind of getting into work were set against this backdrop of this new cool thing called the internet, which was apparently failing and would never catch on, and industry-wide layoffs. Right, that was pretty bleak new millennium apocalypse stuff. But it never happened, right? It never came to pass, and we grew. And then, I ran away to university to avoid work, and I did a degree. So I was saved. I got away from the crisis. And then I qualified and got a job just in time for the 2007 financial crisis. Fuck. Right, second set of unprecedented times I lived through. So I suppose 10 years later, is this really unprecedented or just like the endless repeating 10-year cycle of boom and bust? It's more kind of, look, we're here again. What did we learn? So the truth is times are always unprecedented when you are in them. So some things are true though, okay? So over the last couple of years, the job market has basically imploded across the world for tech workers. Especially versus, our expectations at the end of the 20-teens. We thought more was always going to be more. And this data here is from the wonderfully named layoffs.fyi. Great domain name. The irony is not lost on me that there is now a website tracking layoffs in a tech industry that grows websites. Wonderful. But don't worry, even though all your problematic faves are on here, Google and Meta topping the charts, followed swiftly by Microsoft, Amazon, and also your favorite startups and ISVs that are on the league tables. It's great. Because everywhere that the big 4 or 5 technical companies go, culture dictates that everybody else follows. And, it's bleak, and it's real, and it's scary, and it's mostly unfair to normal people just trying to, make a living and do some good work. Now, the same technology companies, buoyed by this kind of stay-at-home, work-from-home, COVID-19 boom in software profits and services, they overhired when profits were high and decided that the only way to keep investors happy during this kind of not really a downturn, just kind of a return to normality of the roaring 20s was just to, fire everybody, right? Basically at the expense of us all. And, cynically, they did it right before Christmas when they were doing their planning for paying bonuses. Really, really great. High-five tech companies. And kind of to add insult to injury, these companies, lots of these companies use this as an opportunity to ditch the most experienced people in the room. And, it's a cynical ploy to try rebalance the professionals who had finally realized the impact of our work and the massive amount of profits we make for corporations and realized that they could use this as a bit of a cost-saving squish. Pretty bleak. So that kind of sucked. And really the worst part of it all is, really is this technology industry in crisis. This is by design. This is capitalism working as intended. This is the system working as it's designed to work by definition. Capitalism, by definition, only works when the output of its labor is sold for more than its cost. It's the backbone of the system. Capital is then extracted. The private ownership owns the means of production and the capitalization of profits produced by wage labor. And I don't mean to get on a soapbox, but if you're thinking, why is this happening? It's that. So the last 15 years in technology growth has fostered this kind of unhealthy relationship between the technology consumers, the technology workers, and the largest organizations in the world. And by being encouraged to treat behemoth enterprises like they're kind of sports teams that we cheer on and jump between, by listening to the "we are family" rhetoric that was always the hiring technique, not as an expression of empathy. We were shocked when at the first sign of kind of economic change, they just cut us, right? They just cut us out. And ultimately, those companies don't really care about our careers and our livelihoods at all, because they're not obligated to, and this is by design. That's okay. That's the entire point of a company, and especially the largest companies in the world, and we shouldn't feel sad about it. It's just a fact. And then, finally, before we move away from the doom and gloom, I promise this isn't all misery. There's this kind of looming threat of artificial intelligence and those who revel for it coming for our jobs, right? And let's face it, people have been coming for programmers forever. Like, since I started, all the way back in the 90s, there was this glorious idea of 4GL, 4-generation languages that replaced the need for programmers. And again, the current crop of programmerless developer tool chains, enterprises have been constrained by our costs for a very long time, and they really feel it. Programmers are expressive and expensive. Creators require years, if not decades, of training to be really, really brilliant. And the more vital and expensive that we become, the more it's in the best interest to minimize the business's exposure to risk. This is a system working as intended. AI allows them to do more with less, right? And, I know. I am a director of technology at a company who gets this exact pitch in my inbox week after week. Hey, we can reduce your programmer cost. Can you come and try out our new tools? It's all just 3 chat GPTs in a trench coat, but, The best organizations will always do as much more with the same number of people, but don't be surprised when organizations are content with doing the same with less, and for more profit. Right. So this sentiment might make you think that I'm kind of rallying against AI, and I think there's a true answer here which is much more nuanced. As technologists, we should always be pulling at the threads of ideas of what is possible to see where they go. We should always be doing this. And we have to do so in the knowledge that we invent new categories of things, and when we invent new categories of things, the outcomes aren't always what we expect them to be. And in some cases, some good things happen, and in some cases, some good things that people really care about are inevitably lost on the way. And technology reinvention shows this time and time again. That's the real cost of change, the secret cost of change underneath it. And I found it kind of fascinating watching the current wave of AI. And by that I mean kind of AI as a collective term for mass adoption of machine learning and generative AI and adversarial networks, et cetera, et cetera. It's truly actually some of the most interesting technical work that I've seen in my entire career. But at the same time, it's also some of the most overhyped. Those two things are true. And they can both be true together. Now, our first challenge with these kinds of categories of things is to make sure that we walk carefully and be mindful of things that we ruin along the way. Now, in its current form, AI isn't really like an existential threat to programmers, but it's kind of reached that point of utility where it looks good and has obvious uses, right? But the truth is that the current crop of especially generative AI tools that are doing the rounds at the moment, they've managed to get to this point where they can fool an amateur into thinking they can do the work of a professional, but they will never trick a professional into believing their work is of quality, right? They just can't. And it's been, really interesting to watch people grapple with this process, especially around kind of art and literature, where people often who haven't studied humanities aren't particularly well versed, right? So there's all this like eternal discourse about whether, these tools can produce design or produce art. And, the truth is, it's impossible. And the reason it's impossible is, any first-year kind of art history student will tell you that art isn't making images. Art is a thing we do to deal with the human condition. Fundamentally, machines can't make art, but people can make art with machines. Very, very simple. I don't know why people get so confused by it. So this is, of course, because amateurs don't understand that this is what art is. And code generation, in the exact same sense, is easier to fool more people into believing, right? Because most people don't know what code really is and how code really works and what code design is. So it's trivial for your boss and your manager to look at something that generates code and believe that that's a thing that can replace you when it doesn't really understand the job that you do to make that thing good. And the truth is, do I really think AI in its current form, with its long tail, can reach that point of utility? I don't think we'll know for 5 years. Maybe the back will fall out of it this year. Maybe it will never learn design. The current models certainly aren't geared towards doing that. So don't fear AI. So really, it got me to thinking about this kind of concept. Has this Silicon Valley model failed? And everyone kind of copies where Silicon Valley goes. And it's easy to left feeling like it's basically failed us, the workers. Right? It's like an exceptionalist model that celebrates highly isolated success stories and tells you that this could be you. It's been failing video game workers for years. The first bit of software to fail is video games normally, because it's the part that's less respected by business until it makes money. It's failed startup workers for years, and finally it's now failing the workers with really established, secure jobs. And it kind of seems like companies have now discovered that unsustainable growth and unmet promises with more and more humans just poured into that grinder and fire production only, results in them being spat out in the face of eventual failure. It isn't really sustainable, right? So growth at any cost actually has a cost. It really does, and it's us. And I'll be honest, this killed me. It got me. It got me. Burnout is exhausting and hell, and I think that's a bit of a tragic understatement. It's so exhausting that we're burning out and giving up and sharing memes about what our job outside of tech will be. Like an industry that many of us have poured all of our energy and all of our lives into. And it's difficult to love what you do and then see the market forces around it try and destroy it when you just try to do a job. And the record numbers of people are burning out as a result across the industry. Some of us are getting fired, some of us who are left get burnt out. And I know that because record numbers of people are me. And it happened to me. And a couple of years back, I tell no lie, I walked away from my desk at lunchtime, and I went down to the pub downstairs and I had a drink, and I decided I wasn't going back. And I was just done. I was cooked, done with it all. And I'm honest with you because it scared the shit out of me, like legitimately scared the shit out of me. I'd wanted to be a programmer since I was 11 years old, and I didn't know anything else. And I needed to get better against this backdrop of malaise and fall back in love with all of the stuff that took me here in the first place. And it took me a year to get better, a full year. And it changed my perspective on a lot of the things that I believed about my relationships with my work. And I did get better, and I want to spend some time now talking about how I got better and what really, really helped, and kind of how I fell back in love with computers. Now, I'm not going to lie, recovering from burnout is probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my career. It's not software, it's not management, it's not leadership. I spent almost a year reconnecting with the things that I loved about the work before I could consider the things that I loved about the job. That distinction might seem weird to a lot of people, acknowledging that the work is distinct from the job itself. But for me, and I guess to a lot of other people in this room, the work itself is what made you want to do the job in the first place and not the other way around. Now, I don't say that to denigrate people that work in technology because it's just a job, right? And, that can fund their lifestyle, right? Like we get paid well. In fact, I think people who are about to deal with the technology industry as if it's a job and nothing more are actually more resilient to this kind of burnout and its failings because they have a better picture of a healthy work-life balance because, it's just work to them. And that's okay. I'm kind of jealous, honestly. it's like a secret superpower about being able to dispassionately choose a job and a career path, right? Nice and simple. But for me, I had to make sure I still love the work because, it'll tell you exactly about who you are when you love the work. And I want to tell you about how I found that love again. But in discovering that I did still love the work, I was forced to challenge some of the behaviors that we take part in when we do the job, including my own behaviors. That causes, because I think a lot of our behaviors are the reason that people fall out of love with the job itself. And on my way back, I changed my perspective on a lot of things that we do as day-to-day as part of our work, and that I thought were core to how I had worked previously. So I'm going to share a few of these. This dickhead sentence. Strong opinions loosely held. Oh boy. So it's difficult to actually find the origin of this term, though I've seen it attributed, I think very, very strongly misattributed to Jeff Bezos more than once. I've also seen people claim to have been following it since the 1980s, which is what people say when they want to sound smart and they don't know the answer to things. It's funny, when you normally see people talking about that phrase, they use it to talk about how they believe the best outcomes come from furious adversarial debate about technical topics amongst equals. And, you say it like that and it kind of sounds great. But the truth is, I think this is like a really super problematic thing because this phrase has come to characterize the worst of programming discourse over like the last 15 years or so. It's driven us to this weird culture where the person with the loudest voice or the most power or the biggest platform wins debates by default, which is kind of quite the opposite of the original intention of the phrase, which is, hey, let's measure some things together and make a choice. What it does is it has us reducing programming culture to this horrible shouting match that we are just worse for, I think. And with some irony, I think in many cases its proponents are misunderstanding this original intent, which was meant to be a mechanism where people could take bombastic positions and bring them to a place of reason with debates. They were kind of straw man arguments that were meant to be dragged in. But it's basically become a cover for like toxic certainty syndrome. So I've shifted my perspective on, and I prefer kind of this idea of thoughtful opinions calmly suggested, right? And I think that in contrast, it makes a much more meaningful set of conversations where people aren't just being dickheads to each other. So basically, ignore all the yelling men. They're probably wrong. Speaking less and listening more. Now, in fact, I think this was a big shift I found in myself. And it could just be growing up, maybe I just grew up. But it's opposed to being yet another one of those yelling people in the room. I prefer to listen before I speak now, when I can most do it. I think this plays out a lot in technology because we're frequently introducing new things and new ideas, and it's really easy to dismiss ideas without giving them consideration. I see it happen all the time in kind of architecture and design conversations where the single dominant narrative or monoculture idea takes hold. Okay, so I love music, and I watch loads and loads of music YouTube because it's like good for the soul. And there's this really great channel run by a guy called Rick Beato. Has anyone ever seen this? Yeah, it's so cool, right? So what he does is he runs this series of YouTube videos where he takes famous songs that he really loves and he dissects them, and he tries to find he calls the series What Makes This Song Great. And it's such a great, positive way to look at music rather than like boring, stuffy old music critique. And, when people bring me ideas now, anything really, I ask myself, what do they love about this thing? What makes this thing great? And especially when it's something I don't like, or when they show me something that turns my nose immediately, I always ask myself, why do they love this? Because if I can understand why they love this, I can understand them and the idea better. And I think if you spend time presuming the best of people and trying to understand their ideas more, we kind of defeat that horrible reactionary urge inside of all of us that, like, this is garbage because I don't immediately know it, which everybody has, right? If you don't know it, it feels wrong. And of course, the ultimate test of this very concept is to really spend time in other languages and ecosystems. And I think this is the best thing any programmer can do. Absolute best thing is really immerse yourself in a second ecosystem, ideally one where you don't understand why people love it. I spent 2 years doing Python. And what I'm saying is, hey, F#, there's still a chance. learning another language to the point where you, to the point of productivity, will really challenge every single thing you think and believe about what the word best means. You know, you'll know you've got this right when you start preferring some of the aspects of the foreign ecosystem to the one that you came from originally. And you know, I think the most important thing is it changes your approach to best practice, right? This idea of best practice that we're so obsessed with in the software industry. You kind of realize that best practice is just like the dominant monocultural approach of a given language. That's all it means, the thing that people see the most often. There's often nothing best about that. It's context sensitive, and what best is changes with context. So it changes how you think of design patterns as well, and you realize that design patterns are mostly just bug fixes in arbitrary programming languages. And you know, the things that you do repeatedly because you need to solve them and nobody bothered in that particular ecosystem. And it's pretty addictive learning languages because it comes this wonderful superpower to learn that you can actually shift around. And the thing that it gave me is I realized my career wasn't tied to any particular ship that might sink. Right? It makes you bold. Your livelihood isn't tied to the whims of an organization or group. It's freedom, and especially because it will help you understand other programmers better. And that's, of course, because language and framework wars basically have to stop. Now, here's an uncomfortable truth for every single keyboard warrior and advocate out there for any given framework, tool, or programming language. Everything is basically good and works fine. Every ecosystem, every language, every framework is basically good enough today. We are living in this beautiful, bountiful world where everything has basically been polished. And, you know, there's kind of these competing schools of thought, right? The idea that you should use the best tool for the job, and the idea that the best tool for the job is the one you know. Interesting. Well, two things can be true at the same time, basically. It depends on who you are. And the reality in programming is that most of our tools are actually the same and have a shared lineage and a shared future. And I think this is something worth celebrating because, you know, we're finding our first real set of solved answers when all of our tools and languages and frameworks are starting to converge into known good. I love it. There's lots of problem spaces that now are kind of post-innovation and just work. It's brilliant. You know, server-side web frameworks basically all end up as kind of MVC or command handlers. Async await is pretty viral, but it's good and everybody wants it. Functional reactive programming is a pretty good fit for user interfaces. Types and type safety is better than having nothing, right? Everyone kind of agrees. And pretty much every programming language and environment is coalescing onto those truths, and I think that's absolutely fucking wonderful. And I think in the same way that we have, that I have respect for any recorded music, right? I respect music simply by the fact that it exists, because of the amount of effort to get anything into existence so that you have heard it, right? I think, you know, any programming language or framework famous enough that you have heard of it is probably excellent, or at least good enough. So I think I kind of love everyone's programming languages choices now. Like, it's cool, we're chill. And while we're stopping the wars on programming languages, let's also chuck out all the bike shedding. It sucks and it's boring. Excuse me. So bike shedding is one of those phrases that has kind of seeped into programming, and people don't really understand what it means most of the time. So it's when feedback is solicited about a really complicated topic from people with no context, right? And what actually ends up happening is instead of you getting meaningful feedback, you spend a lot of time just talking about asinine minutiae. The term was originally coined, interestingly, as a metaphor to illuminate something called the Cyril Northcote Parkinson law of triviality. That's a name. So Parkinson observed that a committee whose job was to approve the plans for a nuclear power plant may spend the majority of the time on relatively unimportant but easy to grasp issues, such as what materials to use for the staff bike shed, right? And the nuclear plant work was just left thoroughly undone. So when I was in my recovery period, I spent a lot of time thinking about what caused all of this kind of strife in day-to-day work. Well, like, where did my anxiety come from when I was actually doing the job versus actually how I would like to work? And one of the big themes was, like, on a day-to-day basis, how much bike shedding I was exposed to and how much whataboutism I was exposed to. It was just kind of crippling and tedious. So the truth is we practically build it into our workflows by things like pull request-driven culture. It's basically, hey, person with no context, come and have an opinion on this work. I mean, what are you going to get? You know, wide ranges of people are consulted and contextless, and it's just no good for anyone. You know, it's the reason why everybody has an opinion on tabs and spaces and naming conventions, because you don't have to know anything, right? It's like midwittery. So whenever feedback is solicited now, we can all change our behaviors to basically be permissive by default. Just kind of accept that code. You can always tidy it up later. There's no point in bike shedding, it's boring. And also there's this kind of looming danger of monocultures in a lot of technology. Now, here's the interesting thing, that any intentional, thoughtfully approached solution is normally good enough, right? And as our industry has grown enough through its kind of awkward teenage phase, we've become obsessed with this idea of engineering. And I find, you know, in finding this idea that there's this one correct answer to all these problems, and there's one pattern to all these categories of things. And honestly, the only thing I can tell you is that if you think you have found the one correct answer to a category of problems, no, you didn't. You're probably wrong, right? You're probably wrong because, you know, many of our big hits in software were trying to push into being more creative, into making things more flexible, into finding the difference. That's how we innovate. That's how we come up with new ideas. You know, think about Agile. Agile was about describing new and lightweight methods to replace industrial manufacturing, project management kind of processes that plagued software. The movement towards microservices was originally about anti-standardization, right? It was about being able to use lots of different technologies in small constrained spaces, instead focusing on this local optimization and innovation. Actually, when we push against this idea that there's one answer for everything, we get interesting results, and maybe they're wrong, but we always grow. Software is at its best when it's like great sci-fi. Internally consistent, not when it's completely uniform, which is kind of tyranny to everybody, right? So the damage that monocultures do to software flare up in lots of really interesting places. When you're going through the motions during stand-ups that you get no value from, that's a monoculture getting you. When you're making boilerplate wrapping classes in your software because that's the pattern we have in this program, monoculture's getting you again. Industry becomes much kinder, where we can accept competing ideas and conflict, and that's fine. Competing ideas is the magic you get by building things for a living. And, you know, whilst a lot of these ideas might kind of seem obvious if you've been working for any long amount of time, I bet you can think of hundreds of examples that contradict them. You know? And I think this is because of the pace of change in software that can also be kind of exhausting if you're not careful. You know, I say the same thing to every young person or student that asks me for career advice. I always say, just make sure you really love learning if you're going into software, because, you know, you're going to be always learning new things. There is no, you have no choice. You know, the newness about it is the most exciting part, that you are literally always making the future. But it requires an open mind and a calm disposition to survive any amount of change or time in it. And I think the thing that you really have to realize, and especially mid-career, when you really, really feel like you love a technology choice you have made and it's the thing that defines your career, you will not be using it forever. And it's a really destabilizing time the first time that really hits you. You know, any tool that you are using is going to change, and you will probably have to learn something else before the end of your career. I guess pour one out for all the COBOL programmers that managed to fight against this wave of change, like all 10 of them. But, you know, realize that technology choices are temporary, and they're not your identity, and they're not your personality. And otherwise, what happens is when technology changes, you feel wounded, right? And you should never define yourself by things that you cannot control. So, yeah, the good news is, I learned that almost anything that is mainstream enough that you've done it for a job lasts long enough that you can at least kick the ball down the road if you're feeling anxious about it. So, classic ASP. Now, here's another interesting problem. We have a really short institutional memory in software. And we really struggle from this because despite being a really young discipline, it also adds to that kind of cognitive load that contributes to burnout. In the last 5 to 10 years, I've seen this rise of kind of principal engineering and staff plus and there's lots of other names for it. But the reason is we've had traditionally a very, very real brain drain problem in our hands-on programming disciplines from the mid-2000s onwards, until maybe 2014, as programming was largely perceived as a young person's game. So what we always did is we took programmers and we made them managers after keeping them really, really narrowly focused for a long time. And it meant that if you wanted to progress in a career, you kind of had to do that management job, and you had to walk away from the thing that you loved. And the thing that you picked up because you found joy in it. And not only did that vanish, a lot of half a generation of engineers just vanished into middle management. They were no longer sharing that knowledge they had as hands-on people, and their knowledge started to atrophy. And I think it contributed to this really long shadow of very, very poor technical leaders, because not only were we taking away the people from the job they were amazing at, we were giving them a job that they weren't really very good at and asking them to excel without training, and that fucking sucks, right? It makes everything worse for everybody. And we forced them into these roles of people managers where they underperformed. And thankfully this is getting better, because we start to realize that there are increasingly roles for senior technical people who are still technical, and we valued more the roles of leaders who actually are good at the role of leadership. But here's one of the great truths, the best people to run engineering businesses are people that still understand the work. And if you cease to understand the work, you probably shouldn't be doing it. Now, there's an extra interesting side effect of a discipline with a limited institutional memory, is this kind of obsession with new things, this obsession with everything new being best. And by promoting up and out the people that built the systems that the next generation of programmers were growing up maintaining, the knowledge of decisions made and reasoning around design often left with them. So I find it kind of endlessly ironic that for an industry so good at introspection, we are so often bad at history. It's weird. And if you last long enough as a programmer, you see concepts reinterpreted and reinvented time and time again, precisely because we didn't fucking write it down the first time, right? And we never gave people the brain space. Or when we did, the people that knew where the papers were filed were gone. So at the same time, this doesn't mean old knowledge is superior by default either. And when I see people try and pull rank or disregard new ideas at a glance due to 20 years of 2 years experience, where you live the same 2 years again and again and again, it makes me just as sad, right? And I think we should make sure that we understand our roots, but we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. Especially, this is really perilous in technology where, we cling on to this repetitive notion of experience. In almost all cases, I'd much rather work with a junior engineer with a couple of years of experience in a diverse range of technology than someone with 20 years of 2 years experience over and over again who is closed-minded to new ideas and change. Now, you will be much happier in technology with an open mind. That's what I learned about myself and all of my technology choices. Much, much happier if you're open-minded to new things, even if you don't understand why people love them. Now, the older folks in the room have the responsibility to understand why people love something new rather than just shutting it down. And it's on all of you as you grow in your careers. Now, the short institutional memory of technology leads to this kind of weird pendulum swing effect of competing ideas. So, it can feel really exhausting to see this swing between what feels like two obvious points again and again and again in a 7-year cycle, which is basically what happens, And we're currently in the middle of one of those. It's quite fun to watch. We're currently in the middle of the great monoliths to microservices to monoliths and back again story, right? It's everywhere. And also the client-side compute to server-side compute and client-side compute game. It's about 5th time around for that. And the truth is, while this reality feels like repetition, actually often represents a refinement of ideas incrementally. And at each point of that swing, anyone telling you that the opposing view was bad at the time, or old, or has no value, was wrong, right? That's normally what's happening. Hey, we changed all this stuff, and all these kids did this thing that fucking sucks. Let's go back over here. But they didn't, right? And actually, the folks that tend to present these new old ideas shouldn't be dismissed so readily, because there's normally a 2 or a 5% incremental improvement where the thing still has value. And the best things that come out of these cycles of incremental improvements to both sets, right? Both of those things are driven to be better. And your career won't end if you're not doing the thing that's trendy, right? That's kind of cool, right? Just treat those who run away and return later with kindness and grace, instead of being like, you were wrong and you suck because you picked the wrong thing. So I say again, there's no one good design, right? And I think I learned that the hard way. Now, all of this kind of stuff, all of this like interesting contradictory advice makes it really, really difficult to chart your own course and find your way through all this. And one of the things that occurred to me as I was on my way back to the job part of my career is just how much more difficult this process is for people that haven't been doing the work close to 30 years, right? So over the last 10 or 15 years, while the industry was booming, but suffering from a huge skills shortage, that's a really difficult sentence to say, we spent a lot of time trying to increase the accessibility of getting into programming, and it was really, really good, right? We've diversified and lowered the barriers to entry all around. It's opened so many doors for people that normally wouldn't be part of our communities, and I think that's only ever going to be a good thing. On the flip side, we rapidly assimilated lots of people into our workforce who are now being chewed up and spat back out in this downturn, who are suffering a very specific problem, which is that they're a lot less hireable than all the people that were there before, right? So how do you plot a career when some of these invisible constraints apply to you that you might be kind of accepting without knowing it? Now, when you first enter technology, you'll be heavily incentivized to specialize. Right? Always, you will always, and we use the word specialists with some kind of reverence. But this is the backbone of all of the Learn Web Dev in 6 weeks courses, right? I love those things. I love how many people they got into the work. But specializing early has the effect of making you really commercially useful. And businesses absolutely love it because they get to pay reduced rates for people who are good enough at a certain bit of technology. And it feels good, right? You feel valuable. You can be useful, and your job is rewarding. And it's a good way to make money, right? Because you can like make senior engineer in 3 years. But, it doesn't come without its foibles, because specialization never lasts. And this is one of those like you are here moments, normally. Like the problem with this pace of change of technology and how relatively fickle it is, and that what it values changes from year to year, is that if you get forced into specializing early, what's really going to happen is it's entirely possible you will get stuck and trapped in that specialism without the general experience to get jobs elsewhere. And it's kind of a false sense of security because whatever you're using is hot at the time. And it's so easy for the technology you specialize in to become unfashionable, right? Especially if you're not in one of the big cities and big job markets. And it's easy to get lost if your entire identity is trapped up in being a particular kind of developer. And I know that this is often a criticism leveled at the .NET community. There's lots of C# devs, but it's nothing to do with us. I've been in lots of other communities. There's lots of Java devs. There's lots of TypeScript-only devs. There's lots of JavaScript-only devs. It's not just you, but it's just as dangerous to everybody. Specialization is just as much a curse as it is a blessing. So basically, don't be a .NET developer as your identity. Don't be a React developer as your identity, because those tools will change. It's dangerous. And contained in here is really the conundrum, right? Specialize early, get paid, get your senior title, but don't get comfortable. When you're in those early specialist roles, you should do your very best to broaden your technical horizons always. If you're a front-end dev, contribute to the back-end APIs. A back-end dev, learn React and understand why people like it. It's not going away. iOS dev, submit pull request to the Android app. Like always, at any opportunity, spread your wings. Don't let a company flatter you with a job title without the experience and lock you in a box as a result, right? Because actually, that will become a job hunting nightmare when you decide you don't want to work for them anymore. Now, the actual way to succeed in programming, I'll give you the life hack. And despite what it seems in your early career, is not to be an expert in a language or a framework or a tool, despite the fact it'll get you paid. The way to get paid forever and ever, is to become an expert in problem solving. You've got to learn the metagame, right? You've got to become an expert in talking about trade-offs. You've got to be really good at exposing yourself to different things, to competing ideas, and assimilating them into your body of knowledge. That's how you survive. Unfortunately, businesses will like to constrain you. But, the truth is, it's just the path harder traveled to be a generalist, right? It takes longer. it seems more scary, and your course will be confusing, and it might not feel like you have a plan, but it's the same for everybody, so don't worry about it. You're good enough. The other piece of kind of evergreen career advice that I can give to people as we kind of go into the next decade is that we need to own the work where we can. I can only tell you what worked for me. I publish generalized versions of anything, any writing that I do for work, so I can use them later. I open source as much of my software as I can, so I can use it later. Anything I can do in public, I will, because nobody can take it from me. It's the reason I do all these talks. And I do all this not for some grand altruistic purpose, though there's occasionally a little bit of that. But I do it knowing that if I don't own the business that I'm working for, ultimately, I will need to do my best to keep access to everything interesting that I work on in the process through legitimate means. It's the work, not the job. The two things separate. You also need to be really careful giving the fun and interesting ideas to your employer during working hours. Don't do that. Terrible idea. If you have an idea that you love so much that you want to work on it outside of working hours, you should be doing that for yourself, honestly. And if you're fortunate enough to be in a position of leadership, it doesn't matter if it's a team lead or a department lead or a company, you should take the opportunity to be the kind of leader that you needed when you were young, right? You should facilitate, you should de-escalate, always. Help people find mental models and lenses to look at disagreements through with a diplomatic eye. Be kind. Always be kind to everyone. Help everybody. Be clear. Give people measurable goals. Communicate freely. Be honest. When you get made manager, go read management books. Go be the person that you needed when you were learning. Treat it like the same thing you would do when you were given a new programming problem. It kind of feels tragic to me that most people that move into leadership don't do that first bit of learning, and we kind of fail our peers and friends as a result. We can change the face of this entire industry if we want to. And, if you really want to change the face of the industry, understand that you can't make software for everyone if it isn't made by everybody. It's not possible. I don't think it's possible to also give you a single bit of advice on kind of diversity and inclusion that isn't nuanced and detailed and context sensitive. But I know that if you don't take it seriously, all your products will suffer because technology is now used by everybody. And frankly, it should suffer if you don't take it seriously. Even if it challenges your own beliefs. Don't be the person at the conference asking the woman if it's really important and not just statistics that they need to be in technology. Just don't be that person. We're better if we try. So finally, let's talk about passion. Passion is a deliberately emotive word that companies have weaponized against us for about 2 decades. Caring about things is good, but we should probably retire the whole passionate developer thing. It's really weird. Passionate developers is basically like a recruiter-driven CV word for hiring people that go the extra mile and take ownership and other kind of weasel word things for work more and do more of the work than we're paying you for, right? That's all that really means. Your passion has been used against you to make you work for less than you deserve. So the fiery connotations of passion have been used to excuse poor management behavior. Passion's got to go. So instead, I like to talk about joy now. Taking the joy back, finding the joy in the work. That's what I do. It's not passion. Passion's weird. So I want to talk about joy, finally. I know I get here. So other than kind of adjusting my approach and tweaking my own behaviors through all of this, I found I fixed myself by just reconnecting with the work, right? And I can't promise this will work for you, but it worked for me when I was burnt out. I focused on playing with technology again. I was fortunate enough to be able to take a year's downtime, and I know that's like such an extreme privilege that most people cannot afford. But I did nothing but play for a year. I helped people with code. I helped people write conference talks. I wrote open source projects. I did a project that forced me to learn things I've never done before. I relearned a little bit of maths. I made a few games. I learned how to solder. I just did the kind of shit that seemed exciting to me when I was 11 years old and I really, really wanted to be a programmer. Tried other programming languages, I took the time to do all those things that I'd have been interested in if I wasn't doing my day job, and I found that original childlike joy just came back. I made programming magic again, because, and I don't know if people ever felt like programming was magic when you first started learning and you just didn't fucking understand everything and it was so cool because of it, right? And by putting myself into that place of ignorance again, that scary, unknown feeling came back and it made me feel joy. It was exciting. And I played until I felt like I could work again. And to be able to do this, you know, is a grand privilege, but I really hope you can find joy in something if you are struggling. It's also really kind of easy in our overconnected world to be disheartened, to feel disheartened with where you are personally, because it's very, very easy to compare yourself to your peers and people online and influencers and all those people. The unfortunate thing about technology is there's basically an infinite supply of people who are better than you at something, right? Always, there's always going to be. There's no purpose in listening to them. Don't listen to that voice in your head, right? There's no purpose in playing to the gallery. You are good enough. And, you know, on the flip side, it's equally important to keep your ego in check as you grow. You know, a vote for yourself isn't the same as a vote for overconfidence, you know? You can keep yourself from being one of those like extremely online, over-opinionated bores by staying curious, right? And always trying to understand competing opinions. And hopefully always being 10% out of your depth. My rule of thumb is if you're getting that urge to continuously tell people that they're wrong, there's a good chance that you need to work on yourself first, right? Like Reddit actually considered toxic, really. So, having found the magic in the work again, I feel reinvigorated about the creative work of programming. If you were a writer, you would have a written body of work at the end of your career. A painter, you would have your paintings. So as programmers, this is our work. Like the code we write is our work. And I think this is the good part of passion, right? The joy in making programming magic, this kind of beautiful thing is the fact that you're here at this conference right now means you're basically in the right set of rooms to find the new thing that you've not used before to make you happy. So what I'm saying is now understand the sunscreen song, right? I get it. And it's a little bit out of hope that we can make our environment better for everybody if we just only try. So I'm going to do something really, really embarrassing, and I need you to come on a journey with me now. So it is kind of hot in here. I don't think sunscreen's appropriate in Norway. However, you should all wear sunscreen. Ladies and gentlemen of NDC Oslo 2024, use source control. If I could only offer one tip for the future of your programming career, source control would be it. The long-term benefits of source control are just about the only non-controversial topic in software development. It's been proven to work. The rest of my advice that I will now present has relatively little empirical evidence other than my own meandering experience, but I will dispense it now. Enjoy the thrill of learning how to make things while programming is still magic. There will come a time when you can explain most of the things that you see as your eye for patterns improves. But as you start, revel in the sublime wonder of technology while it's still mysterious and it's still magic. You are smarter than you think. Choose a text editor you like. Choose two. Doesn't matter. Worrying about the text editors that people choose is about as meaningful as worrying about the weather in the morning. Don't worry about which computer or operating system you use. Ignore the people who think your choices here reflect who you are. They're just tools. Don't compare your career or social media presence to people that only exist to court drama, controversy, or hot takes. Ignore people that hate the things that you love. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. You will reach your own conclusions in time. Take screen breaks. Respect the systems that came before you, but don't fear diverging from their implementations. These legendary systems are paying for your work. Know that one day your beautiful greenfield application that you're working on might get the chance to become legendary too. Care for them, patch them, improve them. Be patient. Don't reach for rewriting things so readily. Sometimes things are complicated, and you won't understand them without spending a little bit more time taking them in. That's okay. Doesn't mean you're bad at your job. Programming is hard. You'll only really get better at it by doing it. Realize that it takes most people about 10 years to be good at it at all, and it's a path hard traveled. Maybe you'll go into management. Maybe you won't. Maybe you'll get famous for a meme you post on whatever replaces Twitter, and we can all laugh about it later. Success is a mixture of opportunity, effort, and luck, and misattributing it to any of those one things will do you a disservice. Write tests. I don't care what type, but write them and keep them up to date. I've used all kinds of tests, and all I want to tell you is the one that breaks when something bad happens is the best one. Writing tests and writing them well is the one piece of Agile that I've never seen a single smart person argue against. It's an evergreen skill, and you can take it with you. Enjoy hobbies that aren't only programming. You'll never have a rounded enough worldview to understand the people who use your software if you do not. Wear headphones in open plan offices. Appreciate the colleagues who take the time to show you how things work, the colleagues who are patient and kind when you are new somewhere. Treat the new kid that doesn't know anything with the same grace when it's your turn to be the teacher. Everybody's code probably sucks, including your own. Remember that old adage that you should write your code like the next person that reads it is a murderer who knows where you live. Write error messages like you're in love with the person that has to read them. Don't argue with your colleagues in pull requests. They're your friends, and you're just trying to do your best. You'll need them to accept your PRs too, so be kind. Joke in code, pair program, laugh, and chat. The uniform language that will bond you as a team will probably get you through really ugly times with a smile. Don't sweat it if someone doesn't agree with you. Criticism of your work is not criticism of you as a person. Write user stories for that bug, but know when the right thing to do is just to fix it and push it straight away. Follow the rules. Break the rules. Every rule exists as the bandage on a wound of somebody else's trauma. Care about the software that you write. It's your work, even if nobody sees it. Spend some time with it and take a breath. Go home on time. There is no work that won't still exist in the morning. Anything anybody says to convince you otherwise is them thinking that their profits are more important than your life, and they are wrong. Be careful with best practices and those who would promote them. There are many good ways to solve most problems, and most of the time it's just people sharing what worked for them. Share your work. It's good enough. Put the green ticket in the bowl on your way out of the conference so the speaker feels a little bit less embarrassed about doing a poem at the end of a conference talk. But trust me on the source control. Thank you. I'd say any questions, but I don't think I have any answers. Please go find some joy. Please, please, please.